giving individual people the option and the tools to take action in a way that it actually makes a difference is probably one of the more important. We will be one of many that do, whether it's in the energy space or in the plastic space or in the whatever it is. The more you do that, the more likely it is you're going to have a positive outcome.
Welcome to the Inner Genius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
All right. I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the Inner Genius Podcast. I'm excited to have my guest on today, Freddie De Sibert, CEO of Energy Applied. Thank you for making time to be with us today. I appreciate it.
Joe, really appreciate you having me on today. Really looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. Let's get kicked off right from the beginning. One of the questions I like to ask and the audience wants to know is kind of how did you get to where you are today? I mean, everybody takes a different path, and I know you spent some time at Goldman Sachs. And so kind of walk us through the journey a little bit.
You know, with any of these, everybody sort of looks at their own journey and sort of asks themselves, how did I get here? And I think mine was reasonably circuitous. So born in London, moved to California sort of at a young age in the 90s, .com one, early interest in computer networking, computer technology, kind of played around at ISPs when they'd hire teenagers to do jobs that normally a grown-up would do. Kind of built that passion, got to undergrad and decided, you know, what does a broader career look like? I looked at the law, and then somebody very kindly sort of sat me down and said, look, this is a lot of attention to detail and a lot of hard work. And, you know, looking through your transcript, I'm not sure that you're there yet.
Yeah, that's funny. I love
so I stuck with my original passion, computer science, but held on to that hankering for the law, did a second undergrad or a second major in criminal justice. Now, I'd like to say that I was, you know, that I had a degree of foresight. I didn't. Criminal justice, one of the big things they teach you is statistics, because a lot of it is sociology, which involves looking at social studies, which involves statistics.
Okay.
Later on in my career, that confluence of computer science and statistics would get relabeled and branded as data science. That obviously didn't exist circa 2004 when I really didn't know where the career would go. But then I ended up interning at Goldman in information security, because again, played to that love of computer networks and watching systems interconnect. When you do that enough, it becomes a data analysis exercise. But the thing is, you've got to, if you want people to change their behavior, you have to show them facts and data, and you have to do it in a way that doesn't set their eyeballs rolling in their head. That then led us to look at what was then the state of the art in business intelligence, because what was available to large enterprises were big 1980s style report delivery systems, which certainly did the job they were supposed to do at the time. But as far as interactive data tools for summarizing hundreds of millions, if not billions of rows of log data, this was unwieldy. We ended up using a software product called Tableau. It was one of many entrants into the field. Some really smart people out of Stanford had said, you know, there's a better way to think about this. And we were kind of happily petering along. And then I get a call one day and said, I'm so-and-so from investment banking, and I hear you guys are using Tableau. Tell us all about it. My natural fondness for exposition came out. And before sort of 24 hours later, I'm on a plane to Seattle, and we're pitching this company that, hey, we should be your bankers and help you go through the process of becoming a publicly traded company. And that started a career in investment banking. A lot of it was tagging along with the then sort of senior tech banker, who later became a great mentor and friend. Job number one for him, I think, was making sure he didn't have to move to New York. He was very happily in San Francisco, but he took on a mission to modernize the way that the investment banking arm of Goldman, which is one of, but not the only arm of what that firm did, and modernizing the technology infrastructure. Because if you've ever met an investment banker, it's a very legal pad heavy, very PowerPoint heavy business. And that's tough. So a couple of years of that, then became a quant, what they called a strategist. And that was what do we do with all these data assets we have? Like, we know in our trading arm how to calculate the risk and the potential price movements of a stock or an option or a bond or whatever. But
Right.
we have this team that does the same thing in investment banking. And like, what do we do with this data? We don't know what questions to ask. And so that was our team's mandate. And we did it across things like capital markets. So who buys what stock when you floated an IPO, or in the debt markets, or in the sales arm of like, hey, who are the CEOs we should be talking to, we do talk to, but don't talk to enough. Right. Anyway, that led to startup number one, which was a B2B SaaS company focused on who knows who and how well. A lot of it, again, I come back to like data analysis and summarizing data, which led to getting to know the team at Energy Applied. We worked together on a couple of projects building some predictive models for, hey, if we plugged a battery in hundreds, thousands, millions of random places, and we used it to charge and discharge energy, in each of those households, like, and then we somehow got access to the wholesale price. What would you make or lose on a given day? That and some common threads with both the original founder and now my co-founder and then CEO, now head of product, Pierre Duchesne. We had a lot in common. We had some similar career arcs and a view of what you could do about this ever more volatile electricity market, and what you could do to conserve what we have and reduce what we use without fundamentally putting on the hair shirt and saying let's wind us back 100 years and all go to kerosene lamps.
I love it. Yep.
So that became the journey, and I finally sort of put my hand up and said, hey, listen guys, I'd love to come and be part of the founding team here. And so that's where we are today.
Wow, that's awesome, man. I love the story. It's funny. I use a similar joke. I was actually out with someone this morning at breakfast and having this conversation about energy markets and kind of the crisis, and something I actually posted on LinkedIn yesterday talking about that. And it's interesting. It's such a major concern of what we have to face globally. And one of my taglines is, unless you want to go back to candles, this is a problem you got to solve. I mean, it's just what it is. So I like the kerosene comment. I think it's true, conserving what you have, reduce what you use, because I feel like, we are so far behind the demand curve today. And I'm nervous, right? In some ways, I think it's outpacing us. Some of the traditional models that we use are outdated. I mean, look at the electrical grid in the United States. I mean, it wasn't really built for distributed power. There's some real issues out there. So, I mean, I love the fact you guys are taking this issue on and trying to be proactive about how do you insert yourself in this market, which I think there's tons of opportunities for, and carve out your own niche. So I love what you're doing. Tell us a little bit more about Energy Applied. You're talking about batteries. What is it? What's the value proposition that you guys are bringing to market?
Our view is that it is fundamentally possible to reduce demand without changing out all of your appliances, without changing the way you live, because those changes, while important, take time. And you can do that by looking at the patterns in. You can do that by looking at the patterns of supply and demand in the energy market and say, wow, look, when people get up in the morning and when they leave, there are these huge peaks of unforecastable demand, because it's really easy to know when a factory is operating. It's really easy to know when an office building is operating, because those things tend to move in mass. It's not quite the same when you're dealing in the residential space. What can we do to incentivize people? What can we do to incentivize people to be part of that? And how do we construct that? So we said, okay, well, obviously the best way, and I think some of your former guests, when I watched your podcast, it said that, have all sort of alluded to this, energy storage, be it mechanical or electrical or thermal, has a role to play.
Right.
And when we look at the challenges hitting all the utility scale battery storage projects, they're all great projects, or at least, when you look, you certainly find some really good projects, but they take time. Now, this may be a generational thing. This may be I've spent too long in the startup world, but 5 years to me is just an inconceivable amount of time. And yet the average 1 gigawatt battery takes 5 years and $140 million to bring online.
No.
And this is where the personal art comes in. We talked a little bit about my early history, and you think about sort of, okay, computer networks. Well, what are networks? They're distributed systems. And again, I came of age in the world where Napster was new, and those things leave an imprint on you. Distributed access to data is inherently more resilient than putting a file on a single server. Well, distributed access to energy is inherently more resilient, because if you lose one battery, you're not necessarily knocking out a large chunk of your supply. Right. So why don't we just put batteries everywhere? And why aren't either ISOs or IOUs or any of the other really big players doing this? Well, it turns out that moving a small amount of energy across the grid is really, really difficult. So across the space dimension, it's hard to move energy. Well, what about across the time dimension? If our usage isn't constant over time, let's move energy through time, whether that's peak shaving or load shifting. If we can store our own needs and move them through time and kind of flatten that a bit and take some of the volatility out of the curve, you've just achieved that reduction in demand. You've just spread it over time. You become a little bit more flexible, and the more flexible and resilient you are, it's like trying to do compute in a cloud computing service. If you buy spot and you say, I don't mind when this happens, but I'd like it to happen at some point in the next 24 hours, you're going to pay 20% less, 50% less, 80% less. And somebody says at 8:03 precisely, I need this to happen.
Exactly.
So the more flexible you become, the cheaper, whether that's environmentally cheaper or from a simple dollar cost perspective, the cheaper the energy becomes. Right. And so we said, okay, so how do we make this happen? You've got to make the batteries inexpensive. There are some great, I'm not going to sit here and do the full competitive analysis. We know there are great battery competitors out there, but I'm not going to give my competitors or my nearby neighbors any free airtime. But you can go and buy a battery from an electric vehicle manufacturer and stick it on your house. Job done. But you need to put up 20 grand plus the cost of installation. Okay, that's a very small market segment who can pull that trigger. And okay, so how do you do it a little bit more scalably? Well, you can do less expensive batteries. Okay, but then you get 3 minutes on your whole house. And if you're putting a battery north of your meter, you still need the utility to come out and say, yes, you can be north of the meter and be part of the grid. Right. Okay, but what if you do a small battery for a single load, and one that is there pretty reliably? And so we said, okay, what do people need in most of the places that are very peaky? They need HVAC, they need heat pumps, they need to control that thermal infrastructure. This is perhaps born out of spending, the first 9 years of the career in New York. But in winter, it's cold. In summer, it is unbearably hot. Now, that's not true universally across the U.S., but it's certainly something that we see in areas that correlate very highly with ISO coverage. So we put it in where we're fronting a single load, and if we're able to control the battery and when it's operating, then all of a sudden, we've got a virtual battery. You've got something that can then act. You take one battery on its own is going to make a very small dent, but 1,000 batteries, 10,000 batteries, 100,000 batteries spread over a county, all of a sudden, you've got 6, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 megawatts, where all of a sudden you can say, look, we're here to smooth out the demand. We will participate in the wholesale markets. You've got FERC 222 that comes along, and as that rolls out, and it's going to take time, because anytime you're trying to change infrastructure, you're dealing with people who have to plan 3, 5, 7, 9, 10 years in advance. I agree. It's really easy to, as a short attention span startup, say, oh my God, why are these guys pushing back? Why are there endless planning meetings? What's going on? Like, let them work it out. Like, it's complicated, and you're changing operating procedures, and you're dealing with infrastructure that was really conceived in the 1970s, as the DOE rolled out their authorities, and as look how long it took to set up investor-owned utilities at all. I think in a previous podcast, you had somebody sort of talk about PURPA and the fact that this took almost a generation. So the fact that it's taking 2, 3, 4 years after the rollout of, after FERC 222 comes in force for the first ISO to come online, that's not a big deal.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that is probably one of the biggest challenges that
Mhm.
any startup coming into the energy space faces, is that this is not like other startups. You need to move quickly. You're not going to have a lot of capital. That's normal. But the
Yep.
people who will write checks, and who understand the space, you say, "Hey, I'm raising $3 million to do this great idea and to kind of prove out the concept." And say, "Great, this all sounds fantastic. Can you please? We don't know what $3 million is. Can you please come back when you're ready for $250 million?"
Right.
You come
Right.
to your traditional venture capitalists, and a lot of them are like, "Gee, this isn't software. How do you scale your revenue? How do you do this?
Right.
Oh, you've got batteries, you've got hardware. This is really hard. This isn't for us." And doing this in a moment where venture capitals themselves are sort of facing some tough questions from their investors, their
Right.
LPs. And so they have a little bit less of that creative freedom to say, "Gee, I'm not sure I understand 100% of what's going on,
Right.
but the team is great and this sounds good in theory. Let's write them a small check. Let's make sure we're a quarter of the round and go and do this." That normally that's how they'd spread risk around. And at the moment where capital, I think across just about any sector in the US and just about any industry and across the economic scale is scarce because everybody's uncertain,
Yeah.
that risk
Yeah.
tolerance is lower.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask too, when you look at the retail side, and I'm thinking customers, right? You want your product would be in homes. How elastic is that market? I would imagine that it based on what you're saying, it's fairly elastic. People were willing to take spreads, willing to move around their power a little bit. But then you think people working most of the day, not there, scaling back on obviously what they would, because a lot of these thermostats you can set on the phone today, that kind of thing. So it would seem like that's a really good market for you guys. You would have pretty good reception. I'm confident you've looked at that with your data science background, right? I mean,
and when you consider the particular segment of the market that we're going to market with, which is the lower income end of the spectrum,
okay.
You've exactly hit it, right? There's some elasticity of demand, but these are not necessarily households whose first instinct it will be to pay a couple $100 for a smart thermostat,
Right.
or to find the money, $20,000 to put a professional battery in. So how do you re-engineer that proposition to make it attractive? Well, any good business is about matching what's scarce with what's plentiful in two different places, making it happen. Right. Okay, so if cash is scarce on the consumer side, what can you do to make cash available? You look at, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act. It has specific provisions about if you are improving the energy efficiency of low-income households, we will rebate a part of the cost.
Exactly what I was just thinking, Freddie. Rebates. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. This is good. Yeah.
And okay, but like if it's a rebate, you might still be asking your end user to write you a check for even if you're not taking a huge margin on it, you're asking them to write you a check. Well, hold on, that money's still scarce. So what do you do? And you turn around and you say, we'll give you the battery. We will install it. We'll take the rebate. We'll do the financing because, hey, we understand how to do receivables financing. We understand how to keep cost of capital. And on top of that, we will front you part of the rebate, and we will put a recurring income stream so that you are part of this. You are an agent here, and you are directly compensated for absorbing demand. All of a sudden, you've taken future cash, brought it to the present and made it available where it is scarce. And then you've taken where there's a surplus energy at the household and brought it to the market, said, hey, I need energy on demand, or I need to be able to smooth out this peak from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the day ahead market tomorrow.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, these, people are working at this time. Let's charge our batteries before then, and at 2 to 3 p.m. we will discharge it. What actually works out is likely is that those peaks are going to be at 5 p.m. or at 9 a.m. when people are really active in their homes. And you'll have energy be cheapest, especially in California and especially in the summer, at about 11 a.m. when the sun is hitting all those solar panels at sort of full at full charge. If you're watching the markets, like there have been days when energy price has been negative, i.e., we will pay you to use energy at 11 a.m. because there is simply more than we can store now.
Right.
Eventually, those upside down scenarios, those misalignments will smooth out, but it will still always be cheaper when the energy that is okay, not free, you still have to pay to install the solar panels, but your marginal cost is effectively free.
Exactly.
When those are naturally going, be that wind, be that solar, tidal, when that becomes a thing. And if what you've got to do is move it through time rather than space, then storage becomes really attractive. Moving things through space, you still need to move a lot of energy, because in order to, I don't know, your audience knows this probably better than I do, but if you're going to move energy any distance, you're up against the inherent resistance of the electric wires, which means you've got to bring the voltage way up, which, if you're going to do that with a very small amount of energy, is hugely inefficient. And that's the laws of physics. There is somebody much smarter than me may figure out how to sort of bend light and make this happen. That's not going to be us. It's a great deal simpler to move it through time. The technology exists for that.
Yeah. No, this is fantastic. So it kind of begs the question too, like I remember when I lived in California, we had the smart meters, and so there was that capability to be able to, it was all networked, right? Everything, time of day pricing, et cetera. So if you as an owner of the asset, are you also sort of managing the asset, from the perspective of, we're looking forward, we know when we're going to need to discharge and charge, and so that's part of the agreement. You'll maintain control of that to optimize it for efficiency.
Which is why we're the ones who pay for the battery. Is we think our value proposition is being able to treat this battery as one of ours, bundle it up into a portfolio, and have that capacity available.
Yeah, I like it.
Yes, we connect to all of the various different pricing markets, and there are some really smart. When we did the pilot of this, it was kind of me writing scripts to try and mash all of this data into a common format. And you've got 9 or 10 ISOs reporting, and they all have their own proprietary data format because they all did it themselves. And while it's there and it's open and it's useful, and I'm certainly not going to lose any friends before I make them by saying which ISO I think had the worst of all the APIs. But now there are people, who will aggregate a lot of that information. But then you have to look at what the forward curve is likely to be, what the market thinks is going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
There are people who will sell those predictions to energy trading groups, and they have great models. Okay. But realistically, you need to know where supply and demand are, and that information is hard to aggregate, but relatively straightforward to compute. If I were to grossly oversimplify it, I would call it our energy cloud. I think that does a disservice to the simple fact that we say, okay, this battery, which is part of this portfolio, which is in this area, which is most closely connected to this P node, is going to need to do, to charge and discharge at this time. To then be able to bundle all those batteries up, you have to do some things which our electrical engineers have done, and really some pioneering work, which is audit compliant logging of, this is when the battery charged, and this is when it discharged, and this is how much it did, and you have to be able to prove that actually happened. And then you have to aggregate all that information and deliver a report to whoever you sold the energy, whether it's a consumer choice agency under a PPA or the trading desk of a commodities broker. You have to be able to do what you said you did. And while the requirements for how much reporting you do don't really kick in until you're of size, if you do that early and you're extremely transparent, you're going to just have a better time. And I wanted to reflect on a point.
No, I agree with you. Go ahead.
That you made about smart meters. One of the really important things that smart meters did was it showed people what energy they were using at a time. And if you want something to change, the very first thing you have to do is measure it. I think back to my days inside of Goldman, and we were looking at the time at replacing our CRM system. And in theory, right, the CRM should be the secret weapon of every investment banker. It's like, who do I know? When did I meet with them? What happened? Yeah. And people wouldn't use it. And when we were talking to them about, like, why wasn't this working? They said, well, it's really simple, dude. I put all this information into it so that my boss knows that I'm working, and like I bring in revenue so he knows I'm working. But if he or she wants to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, I have to enter it into the system, but I put information in and I get nothing out.
Right.
And to me, that broke one of the fundamental laws of any information system, which is you have to give people back at least 100% of the information they gave you. And if you want it to be successful, you should double that. And same thing with energy metering, right? Like, okay, you turn a light on, you turn a light off, and you see a little chart go up and down about your usage. In a moment, that's not very useful, but you look back and you say, gee, when was I using energy this week? What happened? Where was this spike from? And oh my goodness, we were running the dryer in the middle of the day. Maybe we can be more thoughtful about that. But if you want to change people's behavior, the very first thing you have to do is show them the data.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was talking about that the other day too, kind of changing behaviors and patterns. If you don't know what you're doing, you can't change because you don't know what to change. Because quite frankly, in the mind of that person, there is no problem. No problem. There's no action, right? I think you nailed it. I think that's the key element. Without that, you're stuck in the water. I like the fact too.
Because you look at it's not like nobody's paying attention to this problem, Joe. From a public policy perspective, and I'm going to pick on California because I spent time there, I paid taxes there. My parents live there. They said, look, energy price is a major cost of living burden to people at the lower end of the income scale. Absolutely. Let's fix that. That's not an unreasonable view to take. And whether you lean red or lean blue, it kind of doesn't matter.
I agree. It
makes sense. But the way they went about it was perhaps not terribly well thought out. You can do one of two things. You can just put a cap on prices, which means that if demand holds constant, supply is going to diminish, which is what that cursed bill did, AB 205. It said, we're just going to scale bills, and really the fixed part of a bill, but we're effectively going to scale bills according to income. Or you can say, we are all citizens of a state, and we are going to give people the tools they need to do things better. And the first part of that is instrumentation. And the second is, let's make it easier to do the right thing. When recycling was hard 25 years ago and you had to drive your glass bottles to a supermarket and dump them in the bottle bin. Okay, that was really hard. And then curbside pickup became a thing. And all of a sudden recycling rates went way up. And by the way, recycling is not the whole answer to that problem, but I feel like that's a whole other podcast.
It is. Definitely is. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. I love the fact too that, you talk about, so one of the things I'm curious if this was built into the model. And one of the things I'm thinking is you have this technology, right? This asset, this battery that's physical that would be placed in someone's home. And at first, before we got to talking, I'm thinking, okay, well, you could have thousands and hundreds of thousands of these things scattered all over the place. How do you sort of aggregate that? Who's the spoke, right, with all the hubs coming into it? And it's, I kind of like the approach of you guys taking that, because then that puts you in some ways, almost as a power provider, because you're aggregating, you could control everything. It also makes it easy on the interface side. If I'm a utility and I need power, I have one quote phone number to reach out to, and I can pick up what I need and move on. So I think you guys putting yourself in the center of the town square, I think it's brilliant how you captured that.
But also, thank you. And also, we don't have to be either the only provider of batteries or even the only market maker here. There is a well-established standard for interconnecting storage that it's easy to ignore, IEEE 2030.5. That essentially specifies exactly how these interfaces should work. I see a world in the future where other virtual power plants will say, yeah, okay, we'll do the hard work of some distributed assets. And here, okay, if we want to offer a better price to these users, a greater percentage of revenue share or whatever, like fine. The things that lead to better outcomes are competition. It has been hard to compete in the energy space because the batteries are so expensive, and especially the project sizes, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, there's capital for that, but it's not something that is retail accessible.
Right,
so right. Not only do we want to be the first spoke, or the first crier in the town square that sort of aggregates demand and brings it up to the stock, the metaphor stock exchange, really, the commodities exchange that makes this happen. But also we want to set a pace that this is an attractive thing to do. And it is fundamentally good if we think about why any of us are doing any of this. And it's, we want to reduce the marginal impact of each person's energy needs in order to live a good and reasonable life without just rationing. Because you could solve all this tomorrow if you turned off the grid and gave every single human being a battery that said, this is your daily energy usage.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anything more dystopian. Doing nothing has been a really attractive option for a long time. That's probably not an option anymore.
I love it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So what do you do that is compatible with the necessary human spirit of, I want to be in control of my destiny? That is a fundamental part of being a human being. And it manifests in greater or lesser parts in each of us. And that's totally fine too. And I want to do a thing that makes it less burdensome for the planet for me to go about my daily business. And there's a wonderful expression in the United Kingdom. I want to be about my lawful occasions, which means it's none of your business what I'm doing. I'm not breaking the law, and therefore it's not up to you to tell me what to do. I want to live my life. I want to do it greener. Let's bring those tools to market. And one of the best outcomes we can have is one where, I probably sound like I'm in a time warp from the 80s, but where the free market naturally leads people towards an outcome that has us consuming less. You've got a lot of well-meaning people who fly around in private jets to conferences where they talk about the state of the planet. Probably about to get uninvited from a lot of parties with that one. But giving individual people the option and the tools to take action and in a way that it actually makes a difference is probably one of the more important. We will be one of many that do, whether it's in the energy space or in the plastic space or in the whatever it is. The more you do that, the more likely it is you're going to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the intersection there of giving people a choice and giving them the ability to do something. I think the whole idea of being powerless doesn't get you anywhere. I think most people do want to lean in. I think most people want to do good. And I think most people want to architect where they can. Some people are not able to figure it out from A to Z, but that's okay. You're not always asked to make those kind of decisions. I think in this case, it's a packaged solution that allows you to participate in something that's good. I mean, one of the reasons, people ask, why we do what we do, why'd you build a recruiting company in the renewable energy, clean tech space? And it's like, well, I think to your point, you're solving and tackling some of the most preeminent problems we're facing today, certainly in the United States, but globally. And I think that solving a fundamental problem that is politically agnostic, it faces everybody, is an important thing to do, right? I think there's a lot of satisfaction in that professionally, and you've done a good job of articulating that to date. But also, I think that being able to solve that problem, but there's that feel good that comes with it too. It's a big, nasty, scary problem, and lots of people are going to be taking this one on. But at the same time, there is that feel good about it. I can go in and I can make a difference to this company by helping them scale, to have the best employees, to come up with the best tech. In your case, you've got a technology that's fantastic. We're bringing it to lower income. We're able to help them help themselves. There's something good about that. And I think that's okay. I mean, that's okay to feel good about doing something good at the same time, solving very challenging and very complex problems that, quite frankly, to your point, they ain't going away. They ain't solving themselves. So, you got to get after it. So I love the fact you sort of bring that intersection together. It's clear your passion lies in, wanting to do something good, but also take on something very, very serious. I
totally agree with that. And I was reflecting as you were rehearsing, as you were going over that. There was so this is my nerd coder side sort of showing. There was a real moment, sort of 2012. A person who a lot of people think highly of in the data space, a guy called Jeff Hammerbacher, who built some of the early big data infrastructure and was instrumental in its deployment. he was sort of saying he was working, he'd then gone on to work at Mount Sinai, but at the time he said, geez, we're doing some really clever things with the data, but it's all to get people to click on more ads. And that existential moment of like, okay, I've done something like one and a half the equation. I've done something really smart, might even get paid well for it, whatever. But what's the outcome you're shooting for?
Yeah, good. Yep.
And then you saw, everybody went into venture meetings and said, we're going to change the world by getting people to click on more ads. Okay, that works, especially while the money's good. We live and we are in a phase of the economic cycle, like things will get better, but we are in a phase of the economic cycle where the money's not good. And yet one of the great things about that is it forces you to be a little bit more realistic about the other side of the equation. What's the outcome? What are we aiming for? And that is agnostic across the economic scale, whether you're helping nurse someone back to health or you're trying to, you're at a large upstream energy provider and you're trying to cut carbon emissions. Okay, I can feel good about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's, I mean, it's funny. I had a guest on here recently just talking about, in his previous life, if you will, was a lineman, and talked about some of the work that they did, and when they go into areas that get hit with disaster. So my area that I live in a couple of weeks ago hit with some really bad tornadoes, and people have been without power for a week, 2 weeks, that kind of a thing. And there was a project they were working, and it was an old couple, and the lady came out to the truck, met the men, big strong guys, and said, "Look, my husband's on oxygen. Like we need power for him to breathe, for him to live. Is there any way you can connect us back sooner than anybody? Can you put us at the top of the list?" And he made one phone call, and 10 seconds later they got the approval and they got them hooked up, and so they were the only one on the street, quite frankly, the only one in that, subdivision, we'll call it, that had power. But, they talked about how good he felt, how good the team felt about doing something meaningful. And to your point, what is the outcome? I mean, providing power for lots of uses, and some, it can be life and death. And so anyway, I think that's all real and it has to be considered as a part of the equation. I think it's disingenuous not to include it. One of the things that I want to pivot to too is one of the questions I kind of like to ask, and I haven't asked this one in a while too, is kind of a day in the life. So, what's it like to be you? How do you move through your day? And we could start to finish, morning to evening, but and bring out everything, personal, professional. Is there something that's a part of your day that you do every day? It's like a non-negotiable. Maybe it's at a certain time, certain activity, but just kind of see how you move. What's it like?
That is a question I had not prepared for, but
Okay.
there are a few fixed points in the day. I tend to be an early riser, but I am one half of a couple, and we sort of average in between our comfort zones for when to get up, and that might involve making some coffee, that making sure that things are ready to go in the morning. I find that exercise is really, really helpful, but I probably haven't seen the inside of a gym in quite a while. So I really enjoy racket sports. Now I live at the moment in the United Kingdom. So my choices of racket sports are similar, but not entirely the same. I used to play a lot of squash. I find it a bit repetitive. So I play a game called real tennis, and I know what tennis is. So before the tennis we know as tennis came into being in 1884. It had been played for hundreds of years, but with slightly more complex rules and slightly more unusual equipment. And there's something about that niche that I really fell in love with. I started playing it in New York, and then when I moved to the UK, played there, and I happen to live near a court. And so I want to say I try for several times a week. It probably averages out to once a week to my shame, but I'll get a game. And it also achieves another thing, which is writing software, whether it's writing software or working on a financial model or working on a deck. A lot of it is fairly solitary work. I'm a big believer in teams. I really like that. But a lot of it is what we used to say, heads down. And so those moments of sort of sport and a little bit of adrenaline, a little bit of dopamine, are fantastic for the to really warm up those social angles. Because then I naturally find that I go out and seek those opportunities intrinsically from in the day-to-day work. So, you know, a game or two. There's another sport called padel, which you do see in the U.S., but had originated originally in Mexico, then came over to Spain and Portugal, took off here in the U.K. during COVID because it's a couple grand to put up a padel court. It's 20 grand to put up a tennis court. Well, it's really easy to figure out which one's going to take off more, and it's not not dissimilar to pickleball, which I think has become quite popular, especially on the eastern and southern parts of the U.S.
Right, it is, yeah.
But anyway, you know, a little bit of sport. Then, but I'm a creature of mornings, and so if I find myself in the office before 8 a.m., I'm really happy. That doesn't always happen. That's the other thing. I am right on that generational cusp of whether I believe that work from home is the answer to everything, or it is the last cries of the dying of productivity of Western civilization. And the truth, as with all these things, is somewhere in between. But I find that on a personal basis, I find that going into an office and having a space that is about work, whether it's a couple of us or in the old corporate days, whether it's a couple thousand of us, there is that natural human piece of the passive flow of information, of shared sort of emotions and shared success, that even if you're working on different things, sitting next to somebody who's there as well is a huge bonus.
Sure.
So so the fixed points are some sport, cycle to the office, being at the office, and then it'll be because I'm in the UK, especially right now. I find that my day, the start of my day is when is long before a lot of other people's alarms go off, especially in the US and especially on the West Coast. So I have an opportunity to do that individual work, whether it's sending out some emails, working on a model, what have you. And then the social bit begins first when New York comes online, and then when San Francisco comes online. And then it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of time that is, you really want to make sure your to-do list is done. That way you're present, you're in the moment for those conversations. Another fixed point in the day, I tend to really like coming home and having a moment, again, with girlfriend, and we'll sit down, we'll have supper, and we'll talk about whether it's politics or philosophy or what happened, the mundane, what happened that day, what's so-and-so doing. And then I try very hard not to work after dinner, but it will happen and it is necessary. The other key thing is especially, I think in anything we do, but especially, in something volatile like the startup world, making sure that you find that off switch and you hit it. And wind down. And so my Wednesdays are, and by the way, none of them are good, but Wednesdays are, I take an art class in the evenings, learning to paint and, using that other side of your brain. Nothing that I produce will ever be of any artistic interest to anyone else. But again, it's a little bit social and it's a little bit expressive, and it warms up the creative angles. And also, it is a very fundamental off switch at a time of the week, that middle of the week where it's really easy to get caught up in what's going on, because, times may be great, times may be tough. And those are almost always out of our control, but how you approach it is another thing entirely. I remember early in the career, before I really thought about how other people think about things, because when you're 20 and you're working really hard, you have such tunnel vision. I remember somebody turning to me and saying, "Oh man, Freddie, how you doing this morning?" I said, it's a great day. And he's like, "Yeah, it's Friday." And I was like, Friday. And I can't believe I'm going to say this on a podcast. I'm definitely not proud of this, but I remember turning around and saying, so-and-so, when you do what I do as well as I do it, every day is Friday. And we weren't friends for another 5 or 6 years, probably until I learned to turn the knob down. But the fundamental truth there is, one, I was probably kidding myself. And two, there are things we can control and things we can't control. And controlling your perception and how you look at the forward from there is something that is within our control. So that is probably more of an exposition than you wanted, but that's how I think about my day. And there are variables, right? Sometimes I'm back in the US, and sometimes I'm meeting people more than I'm working, and sometimes I'm working more than I'm meeting people. But and there are opportunities where we gather with team and with our early customers, but the finding those fixed points and taking some comfort in them has been probably the thing that makes us most enjoyable.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I think one of the nuggets there is, that sort of decisive ability into your point, you can control how you respond to things. So sometimes what's coming at you is just coming at you. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you deserve it. Sometimes you don't. Not a lot you can do, but how you respond to that and how you manage that, I think is really, really important, and certainly will decide what that next step's going to look like. Certainly. Yep. So you can set yourself up for a win or a loss pretty easy there. But I also like the break, and I've heard that from other CEOs as well. There's those moments in the week that they really look for a departure from what they're doing. It helps refocus, recenter, and kind of make sure that they stay present and on track when they go back to work. Some people, you mentioned, racket sports. I've had some people say tennis. I've had some people go hiking, running. It's just, there is something that sort of breaks it up to just kind of let the mind wander a bit, allow yourself to be creative. I think sometimes we can be so encumbered by everything going on. It's hard to think, which sounds weird because you're thinking all the time. And, one of the things I've done for a while is like on Fridays, I'll break off to the library. I don't know why it's always worked for me, but something about being in a library for a couple hours in the morning is very, I want to say therapeutic on one hand, but it's very creative. It's where I birthed the idea for the podcast, as a matter of fact. I've never shared that on the podcast before, but it came out of a deep work session where I was not thinking about the work and the demands of growing and scaling the company that I have. So yeah, that's really good. I appreciate that. It's a great insight and resonates with a lot of other leaders that I've spoken with. One of the questions I want to ask too is what's one of the best lessons that you've kind of learned, over the years, and maybe it came out of a big win, maybe it came out of a loss or a miss. Either way, something that's really stuck with you that it's helped.
The best lessons have always come from losses, and I think acknowledging that not everything is going to be a W.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'd say that we all have the capability to do more, but you want to make sure you're doing more of the right thing. I look back on my corporate career. Promotions were, especially when you got to a certain seniority, were very cyclical. And so I would run the afterburners to maximum to, try and get to the top of that list. Sure. But what you do when you do that is you forget one of the fundamental equations of professional satisfaction, which is satisfaction is the ratio of results to expectations. I can still hear my dad saying that to me, explaining the ways of the world, as a teenager. Yeah. The more you push and you're aiming towards something, that's great to be dedicated, and it's really important. But the more you hold that very tunnel perspective, the more you increase your expectations. And so holding results constant, the more your satisfaction goes down. And so being able to hedge that, and it doesn't mean working on lots of things at once, but rather keeping that broader portfolio perspective of what is the future going to look like? And I think if I were going to try and distill that, there are two sayings, or two people who I respect greatly have opined on plans. I think this gets attributed to Dwight Eisenhower, but the fact checkers will. I'm doing this off the cuff, so I haven't had a chance.
It's all good.
Failing to plan is planning to fail, which I'm pretty sure comes from von Clausewitz. No plan survives. It might have been one of the later German marshals, certainly before they were strictly in the enemy column, and which of course they no longer are. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. I then had a mentor of mine put that somewhat differently, which was, if you don't make plans, you are part of somebody else's plans. And this comes back to that, we were having a discussion about self-actualization, really about self-actualization, about, figuring out what the outcome you're looking for is.
Right.
Going too hard either way is likely to really make things less appealing. If you do no planning, you say, you know what, I'm going to live by my gut. I'm going to take each day as it comes. It's a great attitude, but you then de facto become an instrument in somebody else's plans.
Yep.
But if on the other hand, what in the software world we would have called, if you live a strictly waterfall life where I'm going to do 8.1 and then 8.2, and then that's necessary before 8.3 happens. Yeah. And you have this whole linear structure, it becomes incredibly brittle because there are going to be a lot of those things that are out of your control. And even if you're the most diligent risk manager, you mitigate everything you can to your plan, extra events happen. When a British prime minister was asked why government fell apart about 50, 60 years ago, and they all talk like this. Events, dear boy, events. There are going to be things that happen that are beyond our control, and accepting that is also the case. So finding, and we're all going to have our own efficient frontier on this, but finding our, where do we sit on, plans versus events, and really making sure we have an idea of what success looks like. The third restatement I'd pick for that is know what success looks like, but be prepared to accept alternatives. Because if you go into something and you don't know what success looks like, it doesn't matter how hard you're going to work. You're still going to be fundamentally dissatisfied with the result, even if it's an amazing result. You may or may not meet that success criterion, and you may discover that it actually changes. But if you plant a flag and you take the risk of saying, gee, I've planted a flag, I may now fail. Yeah. You're at least going to have a really honest, objective answer of whether you succeeded or failed.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's gosh, I was watching something the other day, kind of on that very point. It was a video, and there was basically a coach talking about one of his, the people that he coaches, and a very, very successful woman, and she was looking to grow and, reach a crazy amount of money, kind of a thing. And so he kind of stopped and he took that step back, that more actualization approach, said, what's the why? I mean, why? You're a hard worker, you're an overachiever, you've done really, really well to date. Obviously, you want to get to the next level. You're employing me to get you there, but why do you want to go there? And it was interesting because her why she'd already achieved and didn't realize it. And so, yes, he could have scaled her to the next level, but it would have made like 0.0001% difference if he really sat and looked at it. And it's like, there wasn't enough, what do they say, juice in the squeeze, right? But more importantly, you don't know why. And that's why you don't even know that you already answered your why. So it's like, I don't think I can help you, nor do I really want to help you, because it's the wrong fit for the wrong reason. And once she acknowledged that, she was honest, right? Which is important. She said, yes, you're right. And her frame changed, and she kind of went in a different direction, to your point. So I think that's great advice you just gave, really. That was kind of one of the other questions I asked too, is kind of a good piece of advice, but I think you got the lesson and advice kind of wrapped up in one.
Where I used to, I remember giving a presentation a long, long time ago, which distilled all of that somewhat cryptically into the weather will change. Wear shorts, but carry an umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember one of my first trips to San Francisco, and I went into the city. We were seeing a client for dinner, and the client was like, where's your jacket? And I'm like, well, I'd just come from Sacramento, and it was like 94 degrees. I don't think we're going to need a jacket. I was probably dressed very similar, had a button down shirt. He's like, by the time we get out of dinner, you'll be willing to pay damn near anybody anything for a jacket. And I'm like, nah, it's just not possible. So we must have walked like 12, 14 blocks to the restaurant, which again, at, 4:30, 5 o'clock, wasn't that bad. However, the fog had not rolled in yet. And it was not what it was going to be at 9:30, 10, whenever we left the restaurant. And I can assure you, I think, was it Hemingway? I've never had a winter so cold as a summer in San Francisco. And I truly resonated with that comment for the first time in my life. I was so cold, I would have given just about anything for a jacket. So to your point, I think you make a great point. So maybe, we're kind of pull it all together. Let's do one more question here. One more. I've got one more thought I want to kind of get your opinion on. What do you see as a projection? I mean, we could talk a little bit about your company, but also just the space in general. Where do you see the market moving? Kind of what's your take on it all? The energy space, and kind of go anywhere you want with it. I want to keep it open ended for that reason.
I think the energy space is going to go through a series of difficult transitions. Mm-hmm. And I would liken them to the journey that artificial intelligence has taken, not in the last 18 months, but in the last 40 years.
Okay.
And it comes back to results and expectations. Some really smart people conceived a lot longer ago than we realize of a computer that could think for itself under a series of different expressions of think. Right. Whether that's expressing ourselves like Siri does today, or whether that's recall like LLMs, things like ChatGPT do, whether that was connecting logical propositions, solving for fairly complicated questions that required clicking through a lot of links to get to. Right. And the thing is, it takes a long time for what the art of the possible is to meet our imaginations. It's one of our blessings and curses as human beings, is that we have a great deal of imagination. Again, it's distributed, everybody falls a little bit on the scale. Yeah. And one of the biggest difficulties we're going to have is we expect a lot from energy in general. And we're going to go through, just like artificial intelligence did in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a winter where we've seen some really great things that aren't quite ready yet. And the Pareto principle will apply, and they will take a lot longer than we expect for them to happen and to be ready for mass market. And we're all going to get disillusioned, and then somebody's going to rediscover it, and we're going to get a little bit closer, and the excitement will be even greater. So I think where I'm going with that is there is a lot of work to do. There are a lot of good short and medium term solutions, and there are some fundamental things we need to think about. Okay. For those who see a longer period of transition, I'd say it's important to get some perspective and keep the faith, because these things will change. But we are at a global minimum of attention span. So you're going to see a lot of people's focus change. If you were in the ESG space 3 years ago, you saw it fall off of everybody's agenda because attention spans are short, but the time required to make these changes is measured in decades, not quarters. And yet that is no excuse for not making incremental improvement, because you will eventually harvest those gains. I am most excited to see where fusion goes this time. So I was a freshman in high school the last time everybody was getting excited about cold fusion. And I don't know why I was excited about it, but I think there was something fundamentally interesting. The physics of whichever system are really hard. And I think we're going to hit another disillusionment wall before this thing really happens. Okay. The biggest variable that I would look for ways to affect is not changing the cost of production, but looking at ways to push consumption down, because it is something that if you change it 1/100th of 1%, a basis point, but you're able to do that especially across the developed world, your gains, a 1/10 of 1% across 1 billion people, across 3 billion people, makes an enormous difference. So where do I think this is going? I think we are 2/3 of the way up a sort of peak of enthusiasm. And there's going to be a lot of hard work that really does not reward people, and we're all going to get a little sad. But ultimately the outcome is probably, if you then position yourself to be ready to handle the economic cycles and the cycles of enthusiasm, the fact that it's going to be difficult when people are, where it's tougher to get people's attention. The long-term gains, both for our industry, but also for I really resile from saying humanity in general, but certainly how we interact with the things we consume gets better. And trying to do anything from the top down inherently is hard to communicate. And so the more we do things from the bottom up, probably the more resilient our outcomes will be.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I mean, I always love getting the take. It's one of the questions I like to ask. I like to see how leaders are thinking about the space. Some it's quantitatively, some it's qualitatively, but you never know. And to me, it's great. I mean, I love being in the seat because it's an education. Every time I get on one of these one of the shows, so I enjoy that, and I enjoy the different perspectives. Everybody's perspective is a little different. Your experience is different. Your proclivities are different. Your strengths and weaknesses are different, which all take people in slightly different places. However, but they're all very good. So I appreciate weighing in on that. That's good. We got to have the faith, and I think you're right. It's a marathon, not a sprint. If anybody's run a marathon, or I don't know, if you run 10 miles, for me, when I run, the first mile is always the hardest for some reason. 2 and 3 tend to be good. 5's not so much my fun one, and 6 gets a little easier. And I don't know why this is the case, but to your point, you got to be able to, you got to ride the wave. It's a long journey. It's going to take a lot of people. There's going to be some ups and downs. You talked earlier, perspectives, things will change. You just got to roll with it. But to your point, if you do these things, you'll win in the end. I think that's the thing. That hope is real. We'll get there. It's just going to take time, and you're going to take a couple of bumps and bruises along the way. But that doesn't mean you win. I mean, you lose. It does mean you win typically. So, what's great, Freddie, I appreciate you having you on, man. This has been good. I love the show today. It was a lot of fun. I think you gave us lots of good stuff to think about. I can't wait till the show is edited and good to go. So appreciate you making
Joe,
the time.
really look forward to watching your future episodes. This has been such a thought-provoking discussion. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I want to tell everybody else out there, if you want to jump in the hot seat and, be where Freddie is, you can see it right behind me, innergeniuspodcast.com. Hit us up and let us know. I want to remind everybody there's an inner genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question always is, what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.